It's not easy to introduce someone as successful in so many endeavors as Michael Milken. He is one of the world's true innovators, both as a financier and a philanthropist. As a financier, Mike revolutionized capital markets by pricing and rewarding risk more efficiently. This expanded access to funding more than 3,000 companies and entrepreneurs, creating millions of jobs. Much of the tremendous growth and prosperity the country experienced in the late 1980s and 1990s has been attributed to Mike's visionary improvements in our capital markets. The business world met Mike when he began his career on Wall Street, but I think it is fair to say that he's carried out a great deal of his vision through the Milken Family Foundation and the Milken Institute. His family foundation is recognized for their work in K-12 education, an issue that we share very common passion. And Mike actually worked with I actually worked with our brother John many years ago on education improvement. But so much more than just in education. The Milken Institute is known as an economic and financial think tank, but it is more than that. Its annual global conference attracts thousands from around the world. Through the Institute, Mike created the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. He is a leader in education, public health, and medical research. Since the mid-1980s, Mike has funded multiple research programs focused on cures for various cancers. One of the first was Prostate Cancer Foundation, and I, like many others in this room, am a cancer survivor. Mike's vision and research efforts have no doubt saved millions of lives. Thank you, Michael. Fortune magazine called him the man who changed medicine. You know, my dad once said, capital is not scarce, vision is. And the good news is that today's keynote speaker brings more vision than most of us could ever dream of. Please help me in welcoming Michael Milken.
Thank you, Jim, and it's great to be with you today. So, in coming here, as I was flying here, I first stopped in Little Rock to surprise one of Arkansas's great educators. But I was trying to think about what is the best way to start this talk. And my conclusion was, what is a meaningful life? And I think the challenges for our societies around the world today is to attempt to determine how do people feel that they have a meaningful life. And in a democracy or other type of structures, if we cannot provide individuals with feeling their life has meaning, all of our institutions and way of life are challenged. A great Russian author, Dostoevsky, often wrote about this, telling us that deprived of a meaningful work, and so many people are defined by their life's work. Men and women lose their reason for existence and go stark raving mad. Now, those that have read his work know it's not too hard for him to write a character that goes stark raving mad. But maybe a better way to look at it is Eleanor Roosevelt, who told us the purpose of life, after all, is to live it, to taste the experience to its utmost, to reach out eagerly without fear to newer and newer experiences. The recession that occurred in 2008-9 and continued for a number of years brought back to the forefront Maslow's hierarchy of needs that many of us studied in high school or college. And as we think about these, and as society rips away safety nets, you start at the bottom here. Can you provide food for your family? Can you provide shelter for your family? Can you meet your mortgage payments to have a place for them to live? And these were challenged by for a high percentage of Americans, particularly lower middle and middle income Americans, for a number of years. You then, if you've achieved that, you can move up. Are we safe? And when you think of so many families living in parts of the world, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., and what terrorism has brought to most of the world today, to our front door, you have to ask yourself, are we safe? Do you feel safe? And it's hard to be safe if every individual in society doesn't feel at least they have a chance to participate. And as you move up, next, loving belonging. Does anyone care about you? How do they feel about you? Is there someone else in your life? Then esteem. Are you honored, esteemed for what you do? And finally, self-realization. Recently, the CEO of Electronic Arts and other game manufacturers have talked about the fact, why do people play so many video games? Why are they competing digitally? And particularly in Asia, it's provided tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people with a feeling of self-realization by being able to win at something, particularly in a very regimented system. When you talk to workers today, it's interesting. What is the most important thing about your job when you speak to them? The first answer, my coworkers, is the number one response, even before interest in work. And as you think about the challenges in America and parts of Arkansas, it's not hard to realize what's occurred when you think of what happened to median income in America, where up to 2015, 16 years later, adjusted for inflation, more than half our population was making less than they did in 1999. So it wasn't hard in the last election to understand why many people just wanted to change, that they had not participated in this great growth that's occurred in the last decade. And lastly, when you look at wealth, it's hard to factor in, but the United States has the lowest median net worth of any developed country in the world. So you'll look here and you'll see that it's a little higher than Greece, but the euro's gone up 15%, and so today, median net worth in Greece is higher than the United States. A number of things have changed dramatically. One of the major causes of this was an overinvestment in residential housing, where people lost most of their life savings and didn't realize when you bought a house you had to set aside some payments to fix the dishwasher, paint the garage, or other expenditures. And as you look around the world, you'll see many countries, median net worth is 100% or even more than the United States. And probably the most chilling statistic that came out recently is half of the whole households in America cannot meet a $400 emergency without selling something or borrowing or visiting a pawn shop or calling a relative. Half of our country. And so it's a challenge, and it's a challenge for our democracy on how we can create meaningful lives and opportunities and at the same time build more prosperous communities. So for me, it really started with access to capital. After Sputnik went up in 1957, I wanted to run our space program. I even wrote a letter to the President of the United States telling him that I was well qualified to run the space program that didn't exist, but was being formed for a number of reasons. I never missed a math or science problem, and I've been reading comic books for many years and fully understood space travel. Well, being 11 years old, I was disappointed that President Eisenhower didn't call on me or even respond to my offer. But I chose to go to Berkeley. In 1964, it was rated the #1 undergraduate and graduate school in the world and had the most number of science Nobel Prize winners. And the free speech movement started in 1964, and it started at Berkeley. And 1964, it was a peaceful speech movement. And it was really related to what are the rights of students. And it wasn't just Berkeley, but this was the first year that the baby boomers went to college. This different generation whose parents told them that one person could change the world, and they could be anything they wanted to be. Our parents, often described as the most caring generation, lived through the Depression and World War II, highly dependent on the government for their survival. So this group went to college, and it was only natural we wanted to know, why is the administration publishing the school newspaper? Or many, many other issues. But my life really changed more dramatically when I returned to Los Angeles during the summer of 1965 to find the city on fire. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I saw armed personnel carriers on the street of a city I grew up in, did not feel discrimination. It was a city of dreams where the entertainment industry was headquartered. And why was Los Angeles on fire? I went and met a young African-American man who told me he watched the building he worked in burn down. He was married, had a child, had no savings. It sounded pretty irrational to me. When he woke up in the morning, he would not have a job. He told me his father was extremely talented and never had access to capital. And no one would ever loan him money to own a business either. I then searched out, how can irrational behavior seem rational? And a lifelong friend to be, Gary Becker, a Nobel Prize winner, had written a paper on why irrational behavior could be rational. I went back to Berkeley, changed my major, scribbled down this formula 53 years ago, that prosperity, in order to have prosperity, jobs, opportunities, meaningful lives, whatever word you want to use, you had to provide financial capital which served as a multiplier effect on human capital, the talent of people, the world's most important assets, social capital, building things like universal education, public health, rule of law, etc. And lastly, real assets that you find on the balance sheet, which make up a very, very small part of the assets. And if you weren't providing capital to people, you were denying them that opportunity. And so I went back, studied credit, discovered everything people believed about credit was wrong. All this was available, and what you discover in life is very few people do research. Many people tell you things, and if you ask them, where did you get that? It's rare to hear the statistics that you just heard presented by a fine group of economists and analysts here in Arkansas. And so as you look at that opportunity and see what's occurred, you have a chance to change the world. I went to Walton and eventually went to Wall Street in the late 60s. And if you look back at the last 30 years of the 20th century, you'll see that once capital was available to people like Sam Walton and thousands of others, larger companies who had a monopoly on capital could no longer compete. And beginning in the mid-1970s and by the early 1980s, these capital markets were open, and 62 million jobs were created by smaller or non-investment grade companies at the time, and minus 4 million jobs by investment grade companies. The leveling of the playing field changed opportunity, and this democratization of capital occurred, and today you will see that a very small percentage of bank loans are owned by banks, and there's tens of thousands of points of light that have provided trillions of dollars in capital today to millions of companies, and gave birth to a whole new generation of entrepreneurs that had interesting ideas, a satellite cable, or that cellular was the future, or a change in telecommunication, or that a young African American man could get $1 billion and own a company in America. Or you could build hotels, or you could revolutionize the entertainment, music, television business. But it all took access to capital. And so as you step back on how to build this social and human capital that is the secret, we sometimes don't really focus enough on social capital. Universal health care of some form, suffrage, rule of law. It's no surprise that even into the late 1980s, that 80% of every oil well drilled in the world was drilled in the United States. Almost every country had access to technology. So why did it occur? One reason: property rights, rule of law, creditors. The U.S. was one of the few countries in the world that if you found natural resources, you owned it. Most other countries, if you found it, it was either confiscated by the state or owned by the state. Probably the best example of the birth of our nation was the social capital depicted in this picture of building your barn. You didn't pay your neighbors or people that lived in your community. As you rolled west across the country and built barns and other structures, the entire community came together to help you build your house and build your barn, just like you helped them, your neighbors next door. Some people think when a company moves, it's the end of the world. Here's a sign in Seattle in 1971. You had a substantial downturn in the economy, and aerospace and airline companies were all on the verge of bankruptcy. Boeing later decided to move out of Seattle, but not at this time. And so the slide said, will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights? But Boeing did eventually leave and go to Chicago. But Seattle never noticed it. And it didn't notice it primarily because of 4 individuals, only 2 of which were born in Seattle: Bill Gates and Craig McCall. And as you think about building northwestern Arkansas, one of the key messages I want to leave you today is just getting one person to come here could change the course of history. Just one. And it was fitting that the Chancellor opened the session this morning, because the number one factor in bringing people to a community happens to be great universities. But why did Howard Schultz go to Seattle? Why did Jeff Bezos go to Seattle? The world is so different today because they chose to go there. And so Boeing leaving had little to no effect. And if you step back and look at when each of these companies went public, today 2 of the most valuable companies in the world lie in Seattle. And the company that has probably done a better job convincing low-wage workers, retail low-wage workers working in a Starbucks, that their life has meaning by trying to earn a black apron by focusing on the responsibility of their company to their community, and by leading the way in so many ways. Their success is heavily based on their ability to have people who could work for any fast food restaurant, if we want to call that, but believe Starbucks is more meaningful and a better citizen than the others. Let's look at Northwest Arkansas. Largest employers. We're all lucky, as we reflect on this, that 3 people, 3 families grew up in this region. And how different is this region because of that, and stayed and built their businesses. The 3rd largest employer is the University of Arkansas. But it doesn't have a medical school here. It has medical facilities that are growing. But if you go to a major university, if you want to pick Philadelphia, for example, or even Los Angeles, the largest employer normally in that city is the medical part of that university. And most of your universities, 60 or 70% of all the employees work in bioscience research or in the medical area. Gandhi told us a number of things, and it's hard to change if you're not willing to work with the people. But one of them was to innovate and focus on these areas. And then there was another person. I didn't meet him at the beginning. I flew down here in 1974 to say hi. And that person was named Sam Walton. And I read this quote as 1974, which I believe is the most important period in financial markets, and gave birth to the world and the financial markets we live in today. He said, "I have always been driven to buck the system, to innovate, to take things beyond where they've been. And I still have at least 100 holes in my back from following that message." 1962, the birth. By 1974, when I came down here, Sears had 1,000 times as many employees as Walmart. 1,000 to 1. Well, today, Walmart has far more employees than Sears. And as I heard a story flying here from a good friend of the Waltons, telling me that they had turned Sam down because it was too risky to leave their company to go work for Walmart back then, I often think of all those individuals that had worked for Sears that felt it might have been too risky to work for Walmart instead of Sears. And it's not size. It's vision, ideas, direction, what you stand for. And today, Walmart's equity is worth 1,000 times Sears. So safety isn't always found in the past. And when I went to Wall Street in 1969, I first discovered that it's quite possible that the management's utility curve, what they were focused on, wasn't necessarily focused on what was in the best interest of the owners. And things to align those had to change. And so many people are defined today as activists or other issues focusing on the company. In 1966, the Wilshire 5000, an index of the market, they called it the Wilshire 5000, but it had 7,300 companies in it. They didn't bother to change the name. Today, more than 20 years later, there's only 3,600. Almost half the companies that are listed have disappeared in 20 years. And what's grown is private equity, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of firms around the world. And today they control more firms than are listed on the stock exchange. The alignment of management, of family in many cases, and the company's objective has occurred by this large movement that's occurred over the last 30 years. So how do we build human capital? Gary Becker told us it's 75% of all the assets. Kevin Murphy, who won an award as the greatest economist in the world under 40 a number of years ago, told us it's maybe 90%. Well, it's not hard to think about it. We all can pretty much understand it. It's education. What is that individual's skills, knowledge? It might be immigration because you can move people. And the United States has been a beneficiary of trillions of dollars of human capital moving. Or it's health. Can we improve the quality of your life and the length of your life? In the education area, there's been a major change in America. And it's not hard to understand in many cases this low participation rate. In the 1950s and 60s, the days of happy days, you didn't really have to have a skill to work. And most of the jobs didn't require skill. They required determination, a willingness to participate. But that determination today is not enough. And 80% of all jobs today require some skill. And so we've gone from a world where willing to work hard was enough to a world where what is your skill? And as you look at technology and what's being projected, you find what jobs could be disintermediated by technology. Well, they're generally lower wage jobs and jobs that don't require much in the way of skill. And as you can see here from these projections, just those people that are making over $40,000 a year because of their skills or knowledge or education, it is projected very few of those will be disintermediated. The challenge to our country can be seen in this chart. And when you step back and look, this is a list of how the middle class in 11 Asian countries spend their money. Number one expenditure by the middle class in 11 Asian countries is food. Number two is the education, supplemental education of your child. In the most educated country in the world, South Korea, 80% of all the children in South Korea go to school before or after they go to their government school. 80%. The average middle-class person in Korea spends $8,000 per kid on supplemental education. If you go to India and quiz the middle class, what is the number one family activity? Studying with their children. 95% of the middle class will tell you that's their number one family activity. And when you quiz them, 29% tell you they hope their child or expect their child will get a PhD. Impossible to occur with only 7% in the United States of our population with graduate degrees, but that gives you a feeling for their expectations. Housing, 10%, transportation, 6%. So people in 11 Asian countries, in Korea, the average size of a residential unit for a family of 4 is 950 square feet. In Hong Kong, it's less than 600 square feet. The size of their house is not important. The education of their children is the number one focus in 11 Asian countries. In the United States, the number one expenditure by the middle class is housing. Number two, transportation. Almost half their income is spent on transportation and housing, 25 times as much as is spent on education, where it's equal in Asia. Long-term, very hard to compete, as the United States created incentives over the last 40 years to get people into houses they couldn't afford, rather than a more reasonable house, and giving them freedom. So many of these families would have invested, but they are house poor or spending their money commuting. And that is why when I visit any place in the world, I always go look at the schools, the early child care centers, their elementary, etc., to see what the future of that country is. And I had a chance to visit a school yesterday in Little Rock to surprise the teacher with one of our National Educator Awards in our 32nd year. We have more than 60 winners in the state, and as I watched every child run up and hug the teacher, a math teacher in the 6th grade, an unusual middle school in Little Rock, North Little Rock, where 9 elementary schools feed into one school. Imagine the challenges in 6th grade as these kids come from many different socioeconomic backgrounds. And yes, we wanted the children, not just the news media, the television cameras, or the newspapers, but the children to remember that day that they were all there for a teacher. Not an athlete, not a business leader, not a government leader, but a teacher. And to remember that, we give them $25,000 each and support them with $75,000 in professional development. Everything's relative, as you heard, and so one of the little kids told me, gosh, $25,000, she's going to buy a mansion. I don't think so. But it does make a statement. Immigration. If people don't live in your community, how do you get them here? For one, we can thank Alice for building an airport, as she told me about it decades ago, so we can come. You now have connecting flights, but you still have one of the highest costs of most airports in average connecting flight. We read and hear a lot about immigration in Europe today, but we forget that 50 million people came in the 1800s from Europe to the United States. No airplanes, a risky flight. In many cases, most of the people in this room's ancestors came. Why did they come? For social capital, a better life, religious freedom, opportunity, a chance based on your ability, that American dream. Not based on who your parents were or where you grew up or your religion or your race or your sex, but a chance to compete based on your ability. Today, in a recent survey, 60% of all the leading entrepreneurs or wealthiest people in China, 60%, if they could, would move to either Europe or the United States. 40% to the U.S., 20% to Europe, and my guess is if you really got an accurate reading, that number is probably higher. It's the social capital. It is priceless. The opportunity to live here. Technology and change. We'd all be naive if we didn't think the world of technology was about to undergo dramatic change. There is no industry that is safe. There is no business that is not going to feel a dramatic change as the percentage of the world's economy that is digitized and moved digitally substantially increases every year. I just want to highlight a couple that I'm sure you're aware of. Agriculture, probably the largest employer still in the world. In the United States, in 1800, 98% of the people lived on farms. 100 years later, it was less than 50%. And by 2000, it was 2%, and probably less. 1.5 million Americans lived on farms, and each of them fed not only the country, but they fed 220 million other people around the world. And today the number's higher, and each person feeds hundreds, if not thousands, of people around the world. Modern technology, growing techniques, and other things hold out a lot of hope for everyone around the world, but they also hold out a challenge in that if you adopted modern agricultural technologies today, not even the future, you'd eliminate more than 500 million jobs. What are those people going to be doing? Many countries are going to resist out of fear that they don't have something for them to do, or they'll lose the purpose in their life. Here's a short video from my visit in China not too long ago, where they're now going to grow food, and this will be around the world in the next few years, this agricultural revolution. They're just going to grow it in a warehouse.
The Chinese government has been funding scientists like Professor Yang Qicheng to research vertical farming.
由于在可控环境下进行生产，所以它的空气环境也是比较清洁的。我们能做到不用任何农药和化学制剂。
Here's how it works. Seeds are placed in sponges and grow up to 17 days. Then the plants are moved a few feet away to a nursery area, and finally into a finishing area where roots dangle in beds of fertilized water until the produce is ready for harvest.
Because our container is climate controlled, it allows us to do a full harvest 26 times a year. And a typical farm can only rotate their land anywhere between 4 to 6 times.
24 times a year you're going to harvest, no pesticides required, 95% reduction in cost of lighting with new lighting technology, and a 99% reduction in use of water by hydro farming, and a 99% reduction in need of land for farming. Only the beginning. Today, numerous companies, technology companies around the United States and the world, are growing the future of food in petri dishes. Impossible Foods creating hamburgers that maybe even Alice couldn't tell the difference, that were made from plants instead of beef. Memphis Foods taking the DNA of a cow and creating a hamburger without the cow. The future is with us. The environmental movement, combined with conservation and many other factors here, and health, attempting to change the food chain. It is now estimated that in the next decade, more than 20% of Americans will be vegetarians. If we look at the challenges in many states, in a recent report by NPR, detailed the most common job in each state over this period of time of 36 years. Which ranked first? Was it a teacher? Was it an executive assistant, secretary? Was it a truck driver? Was it a customer service, or was it a software developer? The answer, job that ranked first in most states in the United States, was truck driver. Ask that family, how do they feel when they read in the paper that you're going to have not only driverless cars, but driverless trucks. I was at a conference last year in Chicago. I arrived a little late, and there was an individual from Silicon Valley telling the parts manufacturers for trucks and automobiles that we have to get rid of the weak link in the distribution system. Because I arrived late, I asked him, okay, I'm sorry I'm late, but what is the weak link in the distribution system? He looked at me like I was crazy, that I didn't know anything, and he told me, of course, the human being. They have to eat, they have to sleep, they get tired, they make mistakes. We've got to get them out of the distribution system. Well, if this is the number one job for males in more than 30 states, what are they going to do? How do you think that family feels today? Top job loss subsectors in 2017. You heard about losses earlier in this part of the country, but retail combines in a number of areas. Let's talk about retail jobs. If you haven't been to some of the experiments in China, yes, we have exported our fast food to China, and many of our diseases have increased with it. But let's take a look at a KFC in an ad that exists in Asia today.
Hi, 你好，来和我聊个天吧。
对不起，我正在打工，老板不让我聊天哦，请点餐。
那好，那就给我来一份蛋挞。鸡腿堡和鸡翅的搭配也不能错过。3号套餐，谢谢。
好的，确认点单并回应。给小鹿来份巴巴的套餐，自在生活就是这么简单。
更多第一手就在 Original Plus， 自在新体。
So if you haven't visited these robotic, you can see that robot was not allowed to fraternize during working hours. But it isn't always great for robots. We hear a lot about how robots are going to do this and robots are going to do that. But there's a show, Silicon Valley and others, that appear on television that, tell you that the life of a robot isn't necessarily great. Let's look at an excerpt.
Pass the butter. Thank you.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
Okay, so we can see even robots need to be loved. Let's talk about, for a moment, the number one driver of the world's economy for the last 2 centuries. The value of health. More than 50% of all economic growth in the last 200 years can be traced to advances in health. And if you ever look at a chart by Nobel Prize winner Bob Fogel, you can see that we have long periods of time, 500 years, 1,000 years, where there's almost no increase in the world's population or increase in per capita income. And as you step back and think about this, if you look at 4 million years of evolution, it added, in 4 million years, we added 11 years in life expectancy. So we went from 26, and eventually by 1900 to 31, but 20 to 31. Now what's happened in the world since that point in time? Well, today life expectancy is now 72 years of age. So 4 million years we increased life expectancy by 11. And in the last 115, 116 years, we've increased average life expectancy on the planet, average, by 41 years. You had almost a doubling in Southeast Asia. And in Africa, in less than 2 generations, you're about to have a 100% increase in life expectancy. Now, the United States has had other challenges. The change in the food chain has dramatically changed obesity levels in America. And when you look at it, only 25 or so years ago, there was only 4 states in the country which had really any obesity problem defined as 15% of the population: Louisiana, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Michigan. Well, today, every state is over 15%. Many of the states are between 30 and 40% today. And all the states, fall over 20, not 15 in America today. The last state to fall was Colorado a number of years ago. And the cost to our society of just the change in weight, our society being the United States, exceeds $1.5 trillion a year. If we could just weigh the same that we weighed in 1991 on average, you'd have a $1.5 trillion growth spurt in the United States. And so because of the ability to sequence and other issues, you see almost every consumer product company today in need of change and focused on what they're going to be in the future. And so we should start with the company that has the largest market cap in this area, more than Coke, more than Pepsi, more than Kraft, more than Unilever, Nestle. And so when do you see change occurring? And so about 2 years ago, a friend of mine who I thought was going to become the CEO of Nestle, who had worked there, they passed over him and hired an individual from a healthcare company to become the CEO of Nestle. And Nestle announced that they're going to be a health company. On social media, they were ripped from the second they put it out. First, they give you diabetes, and then they're going to cure you. They're a 360 company. So what did the CEO and board do? First, they went out and started to buy companies producing vitamins and other things that were seen as healthy providers of food. Next, they announced they're going to sell their sacred chocolate business. So next Halloween, when you buy a Nestle Crunch Bar, I'm sure that the Nestle will be gone from the bar, or a Baby Ruth, or a Butterfinger, in that they felt they could not continue to try to redefine the company. And if you are an investment banker, I assure you, you should be opening an office right next to Nestle's headquarters, as they're going to be selling many other companies that don't fit into what they want to be in the future. And likewise, you should have another office for those that want to sell them things that are perceived as healthy and good for you. This new area of medicine we've entered, immunology, precision medicine, genomics, powerful diagnostic tools, is changing the world and will change. Coke, Pepsi, General Mills, Kellogg's, you're not going to be able to sell a cereal where 50% is sugar. And now with genomics, a Nobel Prize winner, Elizabeth Blackburn, pointed out that even in a 6-year-old, by increasing sugar, you're shortening their lives, and you can measure your telomeres at the end of your cell. DeVol, when he was with us, put out a groundbreaking report, which I'm sure he got a few phone calls from Coke and Pepsi about, the drink differently. Drinking 2 soft drinks a day shortens your life by an average of 4 to 4.5 years, everything else being equal. Most of us would be willing to change what we're drinking. You saw this week that even Gatorade sales have slipped because more people are thinking and drinking of that unthoughtful idea of water. They're drinking more water or designer water. So today, you could probably sequence your genome in an hour for $800, not 13 years and $3 billion. Someday, I'm sure you'll walk into a Walmart and they'll ask you if you'd like your genome, your biome sequence. Just stick this thing under your tongue, and when you leave the store, they'll give you on a little chip your genome and your biome. Immunology, our very first young scientist more than 30 years ago was a man named Steve Rosenberg. He didn't have enough money to take his family to visit the national parks. His 3 girls, his wife, and his mother-in-law. So we started our awards to young scientists, and keeping him at the NCI as it was for the next 35 years, we thought would change the world. Well, in Los Angeles, a little company was founded a couple years ago because Ari Beldegrand lived in Los Angeles, called Kite, and using his techniques of creating CAR T cells, it's just one in many steps here that should eliminate cancer as a cause of death by energizing your own immune system, and eventually the company was bought for a great deal. Disease, technology are meeting today, every day, in a different way that gives us hope to eliminate many of the diseases that inflict us. Here's a look at melanoma, which took my father's life.
AI and robotics are making advances across the healthcare industry, from genetic testing and robotic surgery to cancer research and data collection. Soon enough, you may even run into some AI in the exam room.
Finding the melanoma is like trying to find the needle in the stack of needles.
Dermatologist Roberto Novoa is using an AI algorithm to help identify skin cancer.
It's basically comparing that lesion to the hundreds of thousands of other lesions that it's looked at.
The technology is an experimental mobile version of an algorithm that was modified by a team of Stanford grad students.
What we've built here is an algorithm that, using a single picture, can distinguish between benign and malignant skin conditions.
AI expert Sebastian Thrum led their team.
So what this can do is it can bring diagnostics to your home. Just take out your phone, take a little image, and get as good a diagnostics as you would get if you go to the doctor.
So how did they do it? Oddly enough, it all started with dogs. Thousands and thousands of them.
The way we train these algorithms is we show them many example cases from a particular object class. So for instance, in the case of dogs, we'd show lots of examples of dogs. And then we would test it and understand how effective it is at recognizing dogs by showing it new examples that it's never seen before. A couple of dermatologists approached us and they said, listen, if artificial intelligence can distinguish between hundreds of breeds of dogs, it might be able to do something for skin conditions.
In a test, the algorithm matched the performance of 21 board-certified dermatologists. It was also much faster, scanning skin images at about 200 times the rate of a human.
With sufficient data, I think that they will outperform the majority of humans.
So just think about it. You loan eventually 1 million melanomas. In a matter of seconds, you can scan your body with your Apple app next year and compare it to 1 million and identify whether you have melanoma or not. So whether it is identifying melanoma, reading CAT scans or MRIs, it's not just uneducated or not highly educated workers, but every level today. To question, there is no human being that's ever seen 200,000 melanomas, let alone 1 million. So how do you change medicine? And so we're attempting to do that right here in your own backyard. And it starts with an effort where we committed $50 million to VA systems to change how you're treated. So if you have cancer in the VA, you will not only be treated in the VA system, but by the leading medical center in the area. And in order to do this, you also have to train the way people work and think. So first you're going to have to genetically sequence them and sequence their cancer and sequence their biome. Because if you can sequence your biome and you can change your biome, you might energize your immune system to put your cancer into remission. After that, you're going to need to train nurses to be precision nurses, to be comfortable using all this data. And from them, you need precision clinical research managers. And from there, informatics and biobanking specialists, essentially. And our goal is, over a 5-year period, that through the VAs, we will retrain how you're cared, starting with those that have served our country and have been in the VA system. So the VA here representing the Ozarks, so it represents Northwest Arkansas and parts of Oklahoma and parts of Missouri, will be the focus of our attention as we focus on other VAs around us. So last night, I had a wonderful dinner and visit, and I received this hat. And so, a very valuable gift. So in closing, I want to talk about, if you want to build your community, how dependent you are on a great university. There are universities that have lasted longer than countries. There are universities that have lasted longer than religions. It's not easy to build a university. If you looked at the last 50 years, there's only 3 universities in the top 50 that have been born that are in the United States. And only 1 in the top 10, and that's UC, University of California, Irvine. As other countries around the world have built universities, strengthened the universities, in 1993 there were more professors and TAs in the United States than college students in China. Today, the number of college students in China dwarfs the United States. In 1993, if you came to the United States to go to college and went back to China, you generally were paid 2 to 3 to 4 times more than if you went to college in China. Today, that differential is gone. These university systems are probably the greatest transfer of human capital the world knows, and the United States has been by far the major beneficiary. There are 1.2 million students from around the world in the U.S. today. They come to your community, the best and brightest the world has to offer. They've increased our economy by more than $25 billion a year. 35% of all of them come to California, New York, or Texas. And the largest group is China, second largest India, third South Korea, and fourth, surprisingly, Saudi Arabia. If you look at universities, if you just took a look at probably the university whose academic standard has risen more than any other university in the last 20 years, the University of Southern California, more than 25% of their students are non-U.S. citizens. University of Southern California has also received more donations from non-alumni than any other university in America, and just completing a $6 billion endowment raise. They have focused on international students beginning in 1992 and 3. They were forced to. As Steve Sample became the president of the university, you had an insurrection in 1992 in Los Angeles, which covered a much wider area than it did in 1965 at the Watts riots. Alumni, particularly those with girls, did not want to send their students to USC for safety, and USC developed a strategy to focus on the world. It is not unusual to be on campus and see a couple hundred kids congregating in a science center and all speaking Mandarin on the campus of USC. Georgia Tech, a technology university there in Atlanta, more than 20% of their students are non-U.S. UCLA and Berkeley, somewhat restricted as public institutions at 15, Harvard 15, and the University of Texas 10. University of Arkansas, somewhere between 3 to 4% of your students are non-U.S. citizens. An opportunity to bring the world's best and brightest here and try to convince them of the benefits of Northwest Arkansas to build their business, their ideas, their creativity. Many years ago, we began this program at the University of Pennsylvania. Wharton, of all the leading business schools, had the lowest percentage of students that stayed in the Philadelphia area after graduation. Our comment was the city. They had brought them from all over the world, 35 to 40% of the student body not being U.S. citizens, and the community did not take advantage of the opportunity to get them involved, to get them to care, and when they left, assuming they could stay in, to stay. Where students start businesses generally is where they go to college. And it's not surprising what's occurred in California. These explosion of biotech, pharma, new technology, informatics companies have been created by these students, and it has the highest percentage of students that stay. Venture capital California, likewise, is an outlier. Most venture capital firms invest in a 1-hour radius of where they're headquartered. If you look at a recent study, which was authored by Ross DeVol, who's with you today and knows every little page and every little fact on this study, to look at what universities do the best job of commercializing their IP. Many of them do a great job. UCLA has the most number of startups, but it's not ranked in the top 10 of commercializing their IP. And so surprising to many of us is the University of Utah was at the top of the list there in Salt Lake City. And also number 4 on the list was Brigham Young. Very important, you have a school of engineering. And in most cases, if you go to Hopkins, most of the students would like to major today in bioengineering, not just engineering. And so the importance of the university in creating an opportunity for companies to be located in the area, students to stay, venture capital to be applied in this area. If you look at just the concept of commercialization, University of Arkansas ranks 87 out of about 225. Bioscience is a lot more than health. And you will see in the coming decades, it's all about agriculture, water, defense against pandemics, shield against bioterrorism, reliable energy supplies, environmental sustainability, and even our computers in the next couple decades will be based on biological mechanisms. So what are the universities that are the 20 leaders today in biology? It's no surprise as you look at those that a large percentage are in the United States, that a large percentage are in California. They've attracted those students. In those areas, the companies have grown up around them. The UK has been a major beneficiary in that activity, in that as the US put barriers to entry after 9/11, many of the students from Asia and other parts of the world wanted to go to school in English, and there are 5 now universities in the UK, heavily populated by students from Asia that would have come to the United States, that are among the leaders in bioscience. And I want to, if we go to biology, I want to highlight to you number 8 here, University of California, San Diego. This university was really kind of focused initially as a science university. If we expanded to 60 years or so, the University of California, San Diego would be the leading university that's been founded in the last 60 years. San Diego was an interesting part of our country. It had the best weather in the United States, a great place to live if your focus was on weather. But they had a hard time building companies, and its 4 largest companies over time all went bankrupt. And led by a group of people, which did include Ross among others, we tried to figure out, okay, what did San Diego have going for it besides weather? Well, the anchor was the University of California in San Diego, a science university and one of the top 8 in the world. It also had Salk. It also had Scripps. It also had the Burnham, now the Sanford Burnham. And by getting them to combine their energy like a laser in shining light, over a period of 2 decades, this greater San Diego area now has more biotech companies located in it than any other city in the United States. More than 130 companies using the center of a university to combine these institutes that were created around it. If you look at academic research and development, and you look at those reports, those great reports that were provided to you, and I had a chance to review, you'll see that areas that you look at as a competitor in terms of what you could be. University of Wisconsin, one of the leading bioscience universities, ranks 6th in U.S. government and other R&D projects at $1.1 billion plus. Duke and the growth of that area where they're headquartered, over $1 billion in R&D. University of North Carolina, approaching $1 billion a year in investment in R&D. University of Texas at $650 million, and Arkansas increasing, but substantially below these other universities. If you're going to change the world and change the environment here, this is a good area to start. Educational attainment, you heard the statistics that were presented to you. These other comparable areas, Raleigh, 47% of adults have a 4-year degree. Madison, Wisconsin, 46 plus. Durham, 44. Austin, 43. Des Moines, 37. U.S. average, 31. The thing they all have in common is this human capital, this commitment to education, which draws companies, technology, students to them. And that's our great opportunity. One last way to recruit is in successful aging. And this is another one of our centers. And if you look at the factors in healthcare, transportation, why do people choose to live in a part of the country? Healthcare being number one. We rank these cities, the best cities for aging. And once again, you see the same correlation. Number one, Madison, Wisconsin. Transportation systems, a university, entertainment, healthcare. Provo, Utah, Salt Lake City, Des Moines again, Austin, and so on. And so in building this community, the importance of the university is essential, and the importance of technology and a commitment to bioscience are necessary. Building prosperous cities and regions to attract and retain human capital. Create vibrant, healthy communities, focusing on technology advancements, build business hubs centered around university research facilities. If you want to think about what's occurred, there's a number of quotes I could give you in closing. Here's one. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that does, and I look forward to seeing what this small group can do. Thank you very much.
Ross, you've heard me sing in the shower a few times, but you always manage to hit those high notes. What I'd like to do in the last few minutes we have is to kind of have a conversation like we've had in your office many times, where we kick around a few subjects.
I'm a little disappointed, Ross, that I can't go downstairs to your office these days. But I'm willing to travel to Northwest Arkansas to see you.
We might just ask you to do that. Mike, what I thought I'd start with is something that I very vividly remember. It was the day before the 2016 presidential election, and you told me, regardless of who wins the election, the stock markets are going to rally. And not many people had that perspective at that point. Why did you see it that way?
Well, that night when I looked at the futures market was down 800 points or something on the Dow, I did call the people that manage our money and tell them, just buy everything. It's kind of like that movie, Trading Places, just buy, buy, buy. And I felt that way, and I told you that, Ross, because the election was over. And when you woke up the next day, if someone actually won, there was no more debate. What they were writing in the newspaper was about to change dramatically. And we could get back to work from that standpoint. And the relief that it was over, I felt people would eventually buy. And I also felt when that night, when it appeared that Trump was going to become President Trump, our surveys, as you know, of 14,000 small and medium businesses, The number one factor they wanted was to get the government off their back, one. And two, to have confidence that the administration and the government believed in the free enterprise system. If they did nothing else, no changes, nothing, but just backed off so I didn't have the 17th agency visit me, that I could actually build my business, that just those two things would accelerate growth in our country, and I think they have. And the fact that he won, my guess is the market's up substantially more because of it.
Initially, after the election, what economists would call the kind of soft data, the consumer confidence, business confidence surveys, and others tended to show dramatic improvement. The National Federation of Independent Businesses survey showed that it went the highest in 17 years. Many economists were doubtful that it was going to translate into improvements in the so-called hard data, capital investment, GDP growth. Over the last 6 months, we've seen that happen. Early on, you said that we were going to see an increase in economic performance and equity markets. What did you see in terms of what CEOs were thinking at that time as to why they might make those capital investments that they had been deferring?
Well, let's take a large company, J.P. Morgan. At its peak, J.P. Morgan had 25,000 employees working on compliance. Now, they're a large company. Just imagine you have 50 employees and you're trying to build your business, and I have 7 different agencies coming in here with forms I have to fill out. After a while, why bother? Why bother build a new plant? Why bother open a new store? Why bother to expand? I'm bogged down like Gulliver with everything tying me down. You let me do my thing. You let me build my business. Most people that build businesses today are socially responsible, or they wouldn't succeed. If they don't understand their customers and the environment and the demographic changes in our country, they will not succeed. And I think most young people today want to work for a company that stands for something. But it's hard to wake up in the morning energized and then know that I have this group coming in today and that. All they want to do is put more restrictions on me to run my business. And so it was my feeling that once I have freedom to figure out how to build my business, that I'll invest in my business. And yes, the recent tax reduction for corporations is a big thing. And I whether it's been Walmart who's been a leader, or whether it's been Chrysler Fiat, or whether it's been Disney, just the announcement that they're going to raise salaries or pay bonuses is a clear message to the country. If their tax rates go down, in order to succeed as a company, it's good business to share part of that, not just with your shareholders, but with your employees.
Absolutely. As you know, Mike, I had worked behind the scenes for, I'll say, around a decade to encourage business tax reform, working with Orrin Hatch and the current Treasury Secretary. I don't think a lot of people appreciate just what a game changer this business tax reform we had. It took the federal rate from 35 to 21, and also for entrepreneurs in terms of pass-through businesses that don't pay taxes to the corporate tax system. They cut it, the marginal tax rate to 25%. I guess my question to you is, will this change investment decisions in where you locate manufacturing, research, development, logistics? How does it change the calculus of where you invest geographically?
I think it has a dramatic effect on that issue, but I do believe the fundamental thing is, do you believe in the free enterprise system or not? If you go to Indonesia, capitalism kind of has a bad word, but entrepreneur is a very prestigious thing in terms of their, and I really believe it's an overall position you're taking. Do we believe that millions of organizations making decisions end up with the best decisions, or do we believe that a few individuals in Washington, D.C. know what's best for everyone? It's just hard to believe that someone in Washington, D.C. knows what's best for Northwest Arkansas versus a person that's living here building something. And the idea that you believe in the free enterprise system, I think, is an overriding issue. If you look at many of the surveys that have occurred in the last decade of high school kids who believe the financial markets are rigged and everything else, you really turn a tide here in this election now with just the rhetoric. And I believe that alone gives you a chance to try. The strength of our financial markets, which are the fullest in the world, and as you know, Ross, if I'm an entrepreneur in China and I'm one of the 99% of companies that's a small, quote, non-investment grade company, I'm actually more likely to finance in the United States than I am in China. So I believe that first sends an overriding message here. That go build your business, create jobs, invest, etc. On the other side of the coin, when you look at what's happening in Germany, Adidas has moved factories from Bangladesh to make shoes into Germany and into the United States. Now, why would they do that? Well, we know wages are substantially higher and other things. But with technology today, you don't need that many workers. So the differential in wages is not the determinant factor. The determinant factor are what are the government policies, what do they allow you to do? And that's why you're seeing many of these factories return to the United States. And I'd say the other factor, Ross, has been the explosion of alternative energy and natural gas.
Very important to this part of the country.
You know, it wasn't that long ago that coal, powered our country, our electricity, and now natural gas has passed coal. But I noticed the other day in California that renewables now make up 28% of the grid for electricity. And at our global conference last year and our conferences all over the world, when we have a lot of administration officials, I try to tell the individuals, don't talk about global warming because they're going to tune you out. If you talk about what's efficient cost today, coal cannot compete today with natural gas. We know that in cost. But coal cannot compete with solar today. Solar is cheaper than coal. And someday solar and wind might be cheaper. I mean, who would have thought that Texas would be the #1 state with wind technology? Okay, they have all the oil, the shale, natural gas, low cost, but it's been the leader in wind today. So this revolution in energy is going to bring chemical plants and other industries that use a lot of energy back with low-cost energy in the United States.
In my home state of Ohio, if you'd have told me that there would be another steel plant built in Youngstown, I'd have said you're crazy. Well, in fact, because of low natural gas prices, it has occurred.
I do think that there is a concern here, obviously this issue of tariffs that has come up. In Austria, as you know, Ross, last July, we were looking at, they opened a new steel mill. And they produce high-quality steel. And they manufacture 500,000 tons of steel a year. This company used to have 1,000 workers making 500,000 tons. This new steel mill has 14 workers. And they're producing higher quality steel than the 1,000 workers did. So there is a challenge, and I am concerned if we put tariffs on steel. U.S. already has the highest steel prices, and for every worker in the steel industry, there's 10 to 20 who are bending steel as an output. So you're not going to create jobs net in steel because the new plants are going to require far less workers. And there is a concern if we drive our cost up that the people that bend steel, tin plate, will move offshore, where steel might cost 20, 30, 40, or even 50% lower. Right. So it's a trade-off, and I think if you say to me what keeps me up at night, I'm so worried that we're going to find jobs for our workers, that people feel that they have meaning in life. When you look at these very low participation rates, yes, we have very, very low unemployment, but we have maybe 1 in 6, particularly people of European ancestry, have just dropped out of the workforce. They're not even trying to get a job, and they're scared. They're too old to go back to school. They're concerned they're not going to learn the skill sets. There was a moving out recently where the father lost his job, and the son and the father, unbeknownst to both of them, were trying for the same job. The father didn't get the job, but the father wished the son good luck. And so you can just imagine what's happening in that family. In New York, 3 to 4 years ago, if you wanted to buy a medallion, it cost $1.3 million
for a taxi.
So a taxi medallion, you might have saved for 2 generations, 3 generations in your family, and now your grandfather, your father, now you are not just going to drive a taxi, you're the owner of this business. You have a taxi and other people can be driving for you, and your taxi can be working 24 hours a day. Well, people were able to borrow 50, 60% against this because the value kept going up. Well, what happened? Lyft, Uber came to town. And unfortunately, people were filing for bankruptcy. And you had a hedge fund buy a number of these medallions up in bankruptcy and allow the people that own them to drive the cars again and participate. But just think what happened to that family. The father or the grandfather they saved up money, they bought a medallion, and they were now an owner of the American dream, not just them as a driver, but people driving for them. And they're right back to where they were 20 or 40 years ago. And there's risk that even that job will be eliminated. So to me, this is one of the major challenges of our day. How are we going to match the skills for people with the jobs of the future?
Well, Mike, thank you so much. I know that the audience would love to hear you chat all day long. Maybe we can give them an opportunity in the future. But for now, we probably ought to let them get back to work and take advantage of equity markets rallying. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you.
On behalf of the University of Arkansas, Mike, we thank you for your insights and vision. It was very insightful. And as a token of our appreciation, we're going to give a $500 scholarship to a Walton College student in your name, Mike, and also Ross as well.